Well, while you bring up the slides, David, I'd like to welcome everyone back to the second day of the IFSF virtual conference. Some interesting talks this morning, but I'm sure many people were looking forward to this session when you really get your hands on the tools and GitLab with an interesting presentation by David and John. So without much ado, I'd just like to welcome John Carrier, who probably many of you know, our IFSF projects manager, and David Ezell, the Conexxus Director of New Initiatives. Over to you guys. Thanks.
First of all, this is a tour of what we've got. Now, we've done so much in the past 2 years, all in collaboration with Conexxus. And what we're going to do is, this is a quick summary of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the dictionary. We're going to talk about all our design guides. We're going to tell you which of the APIs we've got at the moment. Then we're going to show you, and all this needs processes and documentation to make it all consistent and standard. And then we'll tell you a little bit about our simulation environments and what tools we've got that makes all this so much easier for you. But anyway, David, where do we start with this huge repository of information we've got? Where would you start?
Well, I think the data dictionary is probably the most important linchpin of the entire effort, in that it touches every single API that we're in the business of creating, and it provides a common language for not just people implementing the APIs themselves, but for people who are using or potentially monitoring the data that comes out of those APIs. Now, that to me is the most important fundamental piece. The next most important is what you have down here second, which is having a set of guides. And those we're going to talk about later. Those guides keep everything looking like it is a single API ecosystem. We have begun a lot of work on these APIs, and John and his team have also worked on a number of simulation environments and tools. Processes for accepting work we're going to cover, and finally, just want to make clear to people that when you see OpenRetailing, it's a collaboration between IFSF and Conexxus. We both, I think, realized a couple of years ago that this was going to be a much more important and better effort if we work together on it.
Yeah, that's right, David. We just want one global standard. None of these country specific or even society or standards body specific. So where would you start? Well,
here's a good place to start. I think the URL there is to the left, and it says openretailing.org. And you will go to a screen that shows all of these options. There's a way to get to IFSF and a way to get to Conexxus. But most important, there are frequently asked questions, a data dictionary, design guidelines, which we just talked about. And this is where I skip the screen up and pull up the live page so that we can actually look at this together. I can find my mouse again.
Yeah, this looks like a useful starting point.
Yes. So let's talk about the FAQs first. So there is a page here, frequently asked questions, and it starts out with what is an API? So if you come away from this session and you still don't know what an API is, we have documented it, and you can go and look. We also discuss a lot of terms. I'm sure that John and I are going to end up using an acronym or a term that you don't know. Those of you who are at home might even want to go to the website, which was that www.openretailing.org, and you could even follow along. There are a lot of different things in the API dictionary. or the API set here. And we start off with what are APIs, then Gitlab is the tool that we use to organize all of this work. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into that. We have a way to donate work. And I mentioned a minute ago the API data dictionary. And we actually have a little time for that. The simulators and tools are very important. Most importantly, we have a validator, which helps people programming the APIs know if they're valid or not. And we also have a way to look at APIs.
Okay, so where do we move on to, David? What you talked about the dictionary. Are you going to show us it?
Well, the next thing I'm going to do, is talk about the dictionary. Okay, the data dictionary, which was the very first thing that I mentioned earlier, is divided up into categories of definitions. And the first category is base types. These are common data patterns that a really good example of a base type is a money amount. And the money amount can contain one decimal point. Remember, we're talking about what's in the computer, not what's on the screen. So it is a dot, not a comma. We allow numbers to be formatted that way, and we also indicate what the currency is. So we have a type that gets reused everywhere so that that pattern is always there for programmers. We then have data types which are more application oriented. And then we, from those, I mean, those are really sort of the same thing. They're also patterns, but they're more specific, and I'll show some examples in a minute. Objects are really collections of those patterns, but each with a name. So the way our documents are sent back and forth is really a set of name value pairs. So we may say first name colon David, and the first name is the tag of the name value pair, and David is the content. Objects allow us to assemble properties like first name, last name, and middle name into a group, and then reuse that group. That's what objects are for. And finally, elements are a special case of an object where there is one property, and that property has a name that should appear globally. So rather than calling something, as we run into often, something like dispenser num in UM or dispenser no in O, the elements give us the opportunity to decide and to publish how we think you should spell the various names of things.
Well, that's a great benefit though, isn't it, David? Because it means then that everybody is using the same name and the same format for common elements within our environment.
Yes.
Do you want to show us a few of them?
So the data dictionary is made up, as I said, of base types, data types, objects, and elements. So as an example of a base type, here is the definition for a 12 base type. And it just shows you how to format the payload. It tells you what it is and how it's a decimal 12.5 string, and it tells you how to format it. This is a very, very basic type. A related type, which is at a higher level, is the amount type, or I'm sorry, the amount, that's not a data type. Let's look at age. So an age is really an integer that's constrained, but it means something. Whereas the decimal 12 doesn't really mean anything. Age means something in our lexicon, in our business logic. So that's the difference.
But David, this is a huge dictionary now, isn't it? The last time I looked at it, there was over 450 different elements and data types and objects and base types in it. It's quite comprehensive now for our industry.
Yes, it is. Our initial source was the Conexxus POS back office data dictionary for journals. And also we used the FTC forecourt device controller from IFSF. And those are the biggest sources of the initial work. And we also have a process for adding items to this dictionary and making them more and refining them over time. So here is an example of an object, which I said, this is an amount. And you can see that there are two different values. One is a value, which is that base 12 type. It says so right here. The other one is a currency that is a string that it comes from UNCEE, ECE. So that we use USD for US dollars and I forget the one, what is it, British?
GBP.
EBP.
Great British Pound.
Yeah, great that you didn't use LB or we'd never get it right. So, and then finally, after objects, there are elements. And here's an example, an account ID. It's really just a string. The important difference between a data type and an element is that it actually tells you the name of the thing that you're defining. So this gives us a way to keep structure around everything that we're doing.
You talk about structure, David, so that moves us naturally on to the our next thing, which is that what Heather always calls the Bible or the framework. And you've come to it. So what have we got in the framework?
Well, the framework is a set of documents. And when we started working on this project last year, we had this first document in the left here. These are 4 different documents. And this little glyph that I'm using here is a reminder to me that I need to go back and show you a page about it. So the design rules for JSON tell us how to define objects in the data dictionary. So those 4 types in the data dictionary are mentioned in these design rules, and as are what we expect. In other words, when things might be optional, when they can't be optional, it gives rules for going from one version to the next. So we have forward compatibility rules and backward compatibility rules that we have to follow. And these are all defined in the JSON, the design rules for JSON. The design rules for APIs are more specific to RESTful web service APIs, which is what our API ecosystem is built upon. And these rules cover things like what goes in the main open API specification, which is OAS. This is a very widely used specification. Just about every company out there using APIs is capable of reading an OAS to define an API. And so we put a few more constraints on here. And between the 2 of them, we know pretty much how a document should look to be acceptable. And we have automated that process a little bit, and we'll talk more about that later. We have 2 others that I'm not going to show today. One is security document that details how applications should link together. We recommend OAuth 2, which is a standard way that various applications can prove to each other that they're who they say they are. Your banking applications, like from your phone up, use things like OAuth. So we're recommending that. There is also a requirement that we do threat modeling. Interesting point is we are a standards organization. So choosing one particular way to do security, if say the implementer happens to be a security specialist and they have other ways they need to do it. Really, the best we can do is make strong recommendations. So this document on security makes strong recommendations and also some disclaimers, which allow people to use things that they need to use because of their policy constraints. The final one, the transport alternatives, there are probably a million ways to hook up devices out there. And even in terms of writing APIs, there are many options, but our goal was to have an API ecosystem that was consistent and as plug and play as we could make it. So the transport alternatives explain some of the other options that people might use and why we chose these specific set of options. So if people...
But David, that's important, isn't it? Because we need to actually, what these two documents do is, in some respects, they reduce choice, because we strongly recommend particular security algorithms and particular transport methods. But we do that because it's a benefit to the industry for interoperability. If you had to support all 20 different security, encryption algorithms, then every supplier would, and every end of each link would have to develop 20 just to be able to guarantee interoperability with everything that exists. So yes, I think we have reduced choice a bit, but we have vastly improved the chances of interoperability. Now, sorry, I just wanted to add that point, David.
And I will also add to that, IFSF traditionally has used more specific protocols, things like LawnWorks. Conexxus has always been very hands-off in that department. And our reward for that has been people using our standards, but you weren't really exactly sure how it was going to work until you walked up to a specific system and asked somebody, how is this actually working? So we saw a very strong need to fix that problem. So the OpenRetailing, oh no, we're back in this mouse thing. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Okay. Here we are at the design rules for JSON. I apologize, folks. I've never had my mouse just quit on me before. So I wanted to talk a minute about this JSON document. There are a couple of important things here. The first is this table of contents. I just sort of wanted to tell you what was in here. You've heard me use the term REST for RESTful APIs. And there is a definition in here of what that is and how we use JSON in that environment. So if you're really wanting to do a deeper dive on that particular part of the technology, this is a good place. It explains how we use JSON, all kinds of other specifics. I mentioned versioning and backward compatibility, and what it means to have a revision and how you can actually design those. So this is a very important, it's a, not great nightstand reading, but it's a really important document to get right. It also explains how we name property names. We use lower camel case and some specific acronyms that are in use. There are how we create enumerations and other sort of date and array and string values, how we actually use these things that are part of JSON. Most important in this is that there are rules throughout this document, and I'll show a few. Here are 3. These rules explain what needs to be done. And most of these rules have been codified into tools that will look at one of our offerings and tell us whether we've actually complied or not. So the other document I wanted to show you was the the design rules for APIs for Open API specification. That's what OAS stands for. So likewise, we'll just look at this, the contents. It explains what the design basics are and how to use RESTful design to create an API. It also gives some ideas of how to synchronize sites. This is a really important topic because there are options in this regard. There are different protocols, things other than HTTP that may do a better job, but HTTP is the most widely used protocol on the web. It's well known. It doesn't have any intrinsically known security problems. There are plenty of problems that people can introduce into it by misusing headers and other things, but it is a pretty stable and good place to start. We also are using a couple of advanced features from HTML5, specifically server-sent events, which give us a very important ability to open an event stream back through a firewall where normally such things would not be allowed. Examples are POSs on site communicating to the cloud. The POS is free to send information to the cloud as it desires, but allowing the cloud to reach back into the POS is a real problem, and server-sent events solve that problem for us. WebSockets have a similar function in that they allow large amounts of data to be sent, maybe data that's bigger than might fit in a traditional HTTP send and receive.
So David, you could say these rules that we've got have been developed just to help everybody get onto the same page as us. So we've been working on these now for nearly 4 years from when we originally started. You joined a couple of years ago and added a great deal of, and Conexxus members added a great deal of extra guidance and implementation experience. So these documents we're talking about, they're a repository of knowledge and experience of everybody that's been using them. So I think they're most useful documents in their own right for anybody that wants to develop APIs.
And I agree with you, John. I think if you were to take the data dictionary and the API design guidelines, if people in our industry simply followed those, we would have, I would say, probably 40%, maybe even higher, higher interoperability, even if you or I never looked at a thing, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what we did them for, wasn't it?
Yes. So they're very important.
Mm. And I think that message that you just gave about server-sent events, that's one of the 7, I think, transport alternatives that we've mentioned. But server-sent events has a second benefit, a good benefit in a practical implementation of firewalls and the security on sites, is that it enables data to pass through the firewall fairly easily. But the other benefit, I think, with it is that SSE is virtually real time as well. And our whole business needs to be more real time. And it is a real time business most of the time. You know, you can't wait more than a few seconds for a response. And if we've got to go over the cloud, this is again a good guideline to help people decide.
Yes.
And anyway, what's this about now, David? Are we going to ask people to donate stuff?
Well, realizing that a lot of people are already writing APIs, there are 2 ways that somebody might want to donate an API. They could be a vendor who would like to see their API become a standard. And sometimes this is a hard sell to certain people in the marketing department, although technical people really do understand that a hardened standard on the front end followed by the best implementation on the back end is the surest way to satisfy your customers. So we have a way of doing it. We have a submission form. It's IP submission form. And there is also a disclosure notice, which gives us the ability to actually use the work, which is really important. And this flow chart, which nobody is expected to be able to read, I can't even read it on my screen, it's so small. But this flow chart shows how the staff and the organizations of Conexxus and IFSF, and especially this joint API working group, which anyone who is interested in being part of our work should join our group. John and I co-chair that group. But the roles of these various groups in bringing these APIs in and adopting them is really speeding the creation of the ecosystem. If we had to write every single API from scratch in a committee, we'd be here quite a while. So we have developed a process so that we can speed that along.
Yeah, so we really welcome donated APIs, but what have we got? Anyway, we welcome donated APIs, but David, what API repositories have we got at the moment?
Well, let's go on a little exploration. This is by no means complete. So the way GitLab is what we use to organize all of our work. Those of you who are familiar with GitHub, GitLab is a very similar tool. It is a web interface that helps manage repositories written in a system that controls content. It's a content management system called Git. It's the same content management system that I believe it's probably fair to say that I don't know what the percentage would be, but it's somewhere close to 80% of all projects worldwide are probably managed in Git. And it's so it's very, very common. The things that people want to do are very, very, they'll be very familiar with it. And we're going to show some screens, but things are divided up into groups on the first hand and projects. And the main way we use groups is to allow access easily. So public standards, and these are the things we were seeing from the www.openretailing.org site. These are available to anyone. If they come to the site and they click on the API data dictionary, they're going to go to the public standards group and they're going to see the published dictionary that's in public standards. Obviously, we have other versions of the dictionary that we're working on, but public standards are things that are blessed for external use. Standards are things that have passed muster in our respective consortia, where people have voted on them and said, yes, this is a standard, but that they are not approved publicly. They're for member use. Work in progress is really the only place I ever am, which is where we're doing any of the real work. And donated work is a temporary holding place where people can put their work and we can kick the tires on it and see how we might integrate it. So I'm going to show just a little bit about the four-port API collections, which have to do with the FTC interface. We have a dispenser API, wet stock management, asset control, and POS activity.
Just to say, David, the site asset includes the remote equipment monitoring, the alerts and the events, because it's not always clear that it includes all that, high level in a tank and OPT door open and things like that.
So let me see which one. So here, you know, every time this happens, I'm going to be able to figure out what to do about this by the time we're done. Okay, this is the forecourt API collections. And as you can see down here at the bottom, there is a pretty nice write-up. And there is also, come on. It is just the darndest thing. Well, I would show you the project MD, but I would invite everyone to, when you go into a project, there's almost always a README file. And if you go to the project file, it will give you a complete description of how that API looks and how it should be used. Okay, thank you. So here is the dispenser API, and I can actually show you what I was going to show you on the previous one. Here is a pretty complete description of how we're using this API, and it allows people to sort of get a leg up on what's in here. The actual contents of the repository, this is more or less standard. The API itself lives in this directory, and there is a documentation and an examples directory, and the schemas are additional definition information for the API. It all sort of holds together, and we'll be looking at that in a minute. Wet stock management, there is a pretty nice look at what this API means, as you can see. And site asset, what John was talking about. And finally, PARA, which is POS activity reporting. Today, mostly a Conexxus effort, but I believe we're all sort of moving in that direction. PARA allows the ability of multiple POS products to contribute sales data, and for multiple stakeholders in the analytics into the system to pull that data. So it's a much more open and free environment. It's a many-to-many relationship for data. And just to give an idea of the kind of complexity that we're setting up here, if I wanted to show you a journal report, these tools, this is one called Redoc, and we're using it for most of how we document things. This is a very deep sort of structure here that has sales events, and it also has refund events and void events. So, tools.
Yeah, so David, this is interesting. One of the things that IFSF has always done is try to provide tools and simulators to speed people's development and to make sure that when they do develop something, it's actually compliant with the standard. And here's a couple of tools that we've developed that make absolute sense. Can you spend a bit of time telling us about them?
And just as you start, sorry to interrupt, just a quick time check. So we're coming up to our time. We've agreed we can extend this. The next session doesn't begin for another 20 minutes, so you're welcome to have an extra 10 minutes on the end of yours. So about a quarter of an hour to go, if that's
Okay, well,
if
I'm
that can
going to
work
need
for
at
you.
least 2 of those minutes to find my mouse again.
Very good.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, and I think we're near the end of our deck anyway. So the spec validator, those documents we showed you earlier, it confirms the adherence to the design rules. It's I have it on here that we can look at it, but really it was just the Git repository. I think I'll leave that to people to go out and look at. User-friendly rendering is actually a really important one, so we're going to go and look at that. Okay. Sorry, folks. Let's go back. Don't cover me up. Sorry. Let's go to www. Let's go back here. And you can find this in the FAQs. If you were to go down here and to the API data dictionary and see what is the dictionary and how do I find it, there is actually a link to this tool that we're wanting to show. This is the renderer. And you choose one of those things that we have defined out there. And if you click on it, let's click on one that I'm sure is going to work. Okay. The forecourt API controller has a bunch of entry points, fueling point information, fueling point actions, transactions. If we look at transactions, you'll see a set of commands that allow you to either look at what transactions are available or take to get information on a transaction, to actually claim and delete that transaction or lock it and unlock it. So these are how these APIs are all set up, but this renderer is much easier to read than the raw code, which can be very challenging. And so, John, before we talk about this, I actually have a brief video. So why don't we go to that?
Yeah, that's, yeah. And this is a video that one of our members created for us. This is an Orion Tech video, but let's listen to it. Not me. And it'll show you just how much our simulator, the progress that we've got with it.
So the two on the left, as he'll point out, are controlling devices, and the one on the right is simulating a dispenser. So you would walk over to it to actually lift a handle. I'll let him explain.
Hi, in this video, we are going to show an example of a post-paid transaction and how two controlling devices, or POSs, will monitor and process the transaction. First of all, we can see in the left the first controlling device called POS1, and on the right the second CD called POS2. Last we can see the dispenser, and in the CD table both CDs are registered. Fueling position 1 is in idle, or ready, state. This state is reflected on both POS UIs. When customer lifts nozzle 2 on FP1 of DSP1, unsolicited messages go from DSP1 to both CD1 and CD2. POS1 and POS2 pick up the unsolicited state change message and change the FP1 icon on both the UIs to show calling. The cashier 1 releases FP1 for fueling by pressing authorize, which means CD1 sends a command to release the FP. FP1 receives the release command and changes state to started. The dispenser sends an unsolicited state change message for both CD1 and CD2 to know that the state is now started. What is reflected in their corresponding UIs? Customer presses the trigger to start fuel flowing. POS1 and POS2 pick up the unsolicited message and change the FP1 icon on both UIs to show fueling. Dispenser sends real-time money information for the CDs to reflect the amount dispensed. When done, the customer releases the trigger and puts the nozzle down. The dispenser now sends a new, unsolicited state change message to both CD1 and CD2 to notify that FP1 is now idle, and a second message to say that a new transaction is available. Both CDs pick up the unsolicited messages and change the FP1 icon on both the UIs to show idle. And both now show a payable transaction available. Customer can now come up to either POS, and cashier collects the transaction. We will do this at POS 2. To do this, we first send a lock transaction command to the dispenser. This transaction is then assigned to CD2 and it cannot be stolen by any other POS. This is also communicated by an unsolicited message. Cashier on CD1 tries to lock the transaction as well, and it gets a message transaction locked to POS 2. Once the due transaction payment is collected at POS 2, the CD2 will send a delete transaction message that clears the transaction at the dispenser. Again, communicated to POS by an unsolicited message. Now the transactions will appear as cleared in both controlling devices. Thank you for watching.
So I think that robot voice is pretty impressive. I don't know how anybody else thinks about it, but they've come a long way with that.
Well, it reads from a script. I guess it could read it in any language. So that was the whole. So, but anyway, that's not the point. The point here is that shows you how far we've got with it. This dispenser simulator that you've seen is somebody asked. It is an API. It is if you were to go into the projects, you would see a project called Dispenser and a dispenser collection, and those APIs in that dispenser collection have developed this. This is just one of the many videos that IFSF has got on its YouTube channel, and another one shows which is the very common pre-auth or prepay message. So the one where you actually authorize the payment before you release the dispenser, like a mobile payment transaction. And in fact, you can see very clearly that although these simulators are currently for diesel and petrol, in fact, because they're IFSF, they also by configuration can cover electric vehicle and hydrogen and LPG and any other alternative fuel. But sorry, David, you carry on. These are important, and they are available.
Well, and it's important to realize what we were just showing was a dispenser simulator. There is a very close cousin to that called the forecourt device controller simulator, which would control multiple dispensers through a single controlling device. And we also have a simulator for that one.
Yes, that's available. Again, from the frequently asked questions, people can get access to that because that one, the FDC, is web-based, so people can try it out as they wish. They can either get access it from the IFSF website, or they can access it from the OpenRetailing website. Either way, that is for use. And the latest version of that is such that if you happen to have the dispenser simulator on your machine, you can either use the inbuilt fueling point simulators or the dispenser simulator. That just shows the interoperability of the products that we develop ourselves. And these are, you can choose between in the FDC simulator, you can choose to use the inbuilt primitive fueling point simulator, or you can actually link to the dispenser simulator. But why? What's another purpose for these, David? Certification, of course.
Yes. Well, so this gives me a chance very briefly to introduce one of our major projects this year is the factory, and the factory takes things like these simulators and gives them a home in a common website. All of the usual security measures are required to use it. So if you are testing a site application like a POS register that wants to talk to a service, you have to use OAuth 2, like we discussed. You have to set it up in a secure way. So it actually gives people a leg up on getting that part done. And we allow the ability to certify either the client end, sometimes called the API consumer, or the service end, sometimes referred to as the API service provider. And we have entry points that will connect to either of these. So if you're creating an FDC and you want to get a certification, we can do that. And if you are creating a site system and you want to get it certified to control an FDC, you can do that too. Postman, well-known ability to create scripts in the API world, we support that completely. And we also, through Postman, can support Newman, because Newman can automate the use of Postman scripts. We think this is a very powerful set of tools that it's coming online rapidly. And check out the FAQ for details.
And David, anybody can look again at the videos and watch a video of the certification process for the dispenser, where there's scripts are already developed with over 1,000 tests in them.
Yes.
But anyway, let's move on. Tell me a bit more about the factory, because that's the key repository for this certification environment.
Right. So everything we just talked about here are the POS, the API groups available by year end, and it's POS activity reporting, loyalty, forecourt device controller, just it's a whole litany. And the this little chart over to the right helps people understand what we actually provide. For integration, we provide, this is the biggest difference. Integration is much simpler. It is a much more low cost option. And we provide client scripts. For certification and pre-certification, we actually have a simulated client that we can give access to. And this pre-certification is not, but certification will actually give you a certification certificate. And I think I've already shown that one. So, John, real quick, do you want to do the what's next? And
yeah, well, yeah. The thing is, we've had to rush through this, and unfortunately, David's mouse was playing up. It's yeah, but otherwise, you can actually play with it all yourself. Most of these for members can get in. And what I wanted to just mention here now is, look, you just go and look at the websites to get the standards. You can participate in the groups and influence the standards. And if you've got APIs or know about APIs in this area, well, we don't want to have to produce bodies to spend hours looking at them. If you've got them, use the dictionary and the API spec validator, and that means that, as David says, they'll be 80% compliant then. So if you've named something Fred and it should be called Freddy, well, it doesn't take long to change it, and then it'll pass the API spec validator. And if you've got new data elements, they get identified, and we can put them in the dictionary if they're truly new elements. But quite often we've found that it's just somebody's called it a different name. And if you've started to use these, one of the things that David said is the way that you do change requests to improve the quality and functionality of all this is you just raise an issue in GitLab, and we will always handle that issue either in an API work group, or somebody will pick it up. And if it means that we can refer you to a frequently asked question, or we need to add another entry in the frequently asked questions, we will do that. So as David has said several times today, the best starting point is those frequently asked questions, and we are going to keep adding to them. We've got, there's links to videos in there that show you how to do things like downloading Docker and everything. And of course, if you want to really get started, you can contact us at support@OpenRetailing, and somebody will help you find something you need or what you want to do. And that's about where we're up to now. And this is all this that you've seen has really been developed and pushed forward in the last 18 months. So 18 months ago, the dictionary consisted of 76 entries. It's now over 460, which is a mammoth improvement. And again, in terms of APIs, we're now up to probably up to 180 separate endpoints, because some of them are shared. Remember, that's one of the great benefits of APIs, is that, for example, the mobile payment, the FDC, the dispenser are all using the same APIs for things like, well, basic things like getting dispenser ID, getting transactions. They're all using the same API because they all need the same data. The only difference is that, of course, they're there to deliver different services and different business applications.
So John, David, I realise that this was always going to be a squeeze to get this into the time, and quite rightly it is. And I'm sure you could go on for quite a long time and give us a lot more valuable information, but unfortunately we're out of time. I will just share one of the questions, which is the OpenRetailing and the Gitlab. Can anybody with an IFSF or Conexxus account get in there?
We showed the public part. If you go to www.openretailing.org, anyone can go there. Mm-hmm. Anything that's in the work in progress, though, if you were interested in being part of a committee or examining work, before it's released, the board of IFSF, or I should say the respective boards of IFSF and Conexxus, decide what becomes public and what doesn't. As you can see from openretailing.org, there are a number of things that are already public. And you can always send a message to support@openretailing.org if you have any trouble finding anything, and we can tell you either why you can't find it or where it is.
Thanks, David. And for more information, as you say, OpenRetailing FAQ is a very useful resource. We've also got the panel session tomorrow. That's 11 in the morning CET, 10 UK time. If maybe some of your questions are answered there. And next, of course, in just a few minutes, we have a different kind of session. This is Nick Allen and Mirko Spagnoletti talking about what IFSF can do for you, particularly aimed at suppliers to the industry, to make sure that their voice comes into this organization, and the organization serves them as well. So thank you again, John and David. And please hang on, and if you're interested as a supplier in hearing from Nick and Mirko.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.